Welcome to the Leadership We Need Now, a space where we talk about kind, caring, and courageous leadership. I'm Stacey Dye, and I've been a nonprofit director for over 20 years. I'm also a strategist and an executive coach. And today I want to talk about thinking outside the box. This was actually a topic that was suggested to me, and I love it because we were just brainstorming two leaders together about ideas and being creative and how we each needed to step outside of our own boxes to think about what's next. And it kind of spurred this conversation that even if you've been doing it for years, you still need to be able to check what you're doing and check the way you're doing things moving forward. And so I think about when I started 20 plus years ago, I was really brought in at a perfect time because we, at that time, had talked about, from our funders, big goals. How do we solve the hunger problem in your community? How do we help with people that need housing? How do we help to make sure that kids get insurance that they need? So we were given these big, broad goals, and then they said to us, we trust you, we believe in you, we know that you are capable, have the skills, the knowledge, the experience, and the connections to make things change. If we give you this amount of money, what could you do to change that or get us closer to that goal? And that was so empowering for somebody who describes themselves as creative, who loves new ideas, who loves inventing. That was really so invigorating for me to have A, the trust, but then also B, the opportunity to, yes, it was one issue, but the box was so big to think inside of that I could be creative if it was, instead of, just being given directives, which is closer to what funders do now and grants and contracts do now, which is you will have a food pantry from 8 to 4 every day, staffed Monday through Friday. When you're able to think outside of the box, you look at that and say, how many pantries are already in my community? How many are open from 8 to 5 or 8 to 4? And really we need them in the evenings or we need them on the weekends. How many really come and get the food? Wouldn't it be better to use those resources to get people what they need when they need it? So maybe it's doing a mobile order or pickup order for specific things. If they have a milk preference or a meat preference or dietary issues, you could be very specific about helping them. And it isn't about stocking the shelves with shelf-stable foods that people may or may not like. And so when you're given this box, as a young professional, was given this huge box to think inside of. And that was so invigorating and energizing. And I've been able to keep that energy up because I was taught that way. And I think that as the box has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, which it absolutely has, where it is controlled by people above us, people with money, people with resources, people at, a government level who are telling us how to do the work, even though they don't live in our communities, don't do the work, don't understand the people we're serving or the barriers that exist. We've constantly been put into this small box to think about things. And so I think it's like anything else. It's a muscle. If we don't use it, it atrophies. And I think that for people coming into the field, people new into these positions, new into social services or grants or programs like that, it's kind of debilitating because we're really not trying to solve the problems anymore. We're trying to check off things on a list. And that's not our fault. We won't get resources for our community if we don't do that. You won't have these services at all. Even if they're not perfect, you still have them. You still have availability. You can still help people. And so the privilege or the opportunity to think outside of a box is really important. And I think that even if it's something that you're doing outside of your, scheduled time at your pantry or while you're doing your pantry, you're almost like your dream list or your creative list, or everybody teases me, but I have a notebook with random ideas or random conversations or things that I thought of that were I think that's a really good idea. Don't have any capacity, don't have any money to do it, don't have the right people, but that's a good idea. I need to kind of hold on to it and make a note. But I think that thinking outside of the box is this lost skill, this lost art. And we've kind of moved into this cycle where it's like the people up here tell us how this should be done, even though they don't particularly know. Maybe there's some studies, or maybe there's some research, or maybe there's past experience. But the problem with all of that is who's collecting that? I can tell you in my field, people aren't collecting the right information because we're not given those tools. We're not able to collect if something is really impacting, especially if we're preventing something. If we're preventing somebody from starving, we can't put that into a, qualitative or quantitative, chart that shows, yes, because of our ramen and our can of SpaghettiOs and tuna, those 3 cans really just made sure those people didn't starve. We can't do that. The only time you can really do that is when you're doing intervention. And so prevention, which means this person didn't go homeless because of what you did, or this person didn't go hungry because of what you did, whatever you added to the plate really helped change that person's life. We've really stopped thinking about those things. We've really stopped being creative and innovative, not because we've wanted to, but because that's what pays the bills, is listening, obeying, doing what somebody else says. And so I think this is a muscle we have to start training again. This is something that, especially if you're new in the field, well, let me start that over. In this field, you need to start training this muscle again, whether you're new or whether you've been doing it for 20, 30 years, because it is still something that the world needs. The world needs creativity and innovation and thinking about others and removing boundaries and offering opportunities in ways people haven't thought of. And I think that's the funny thing. Like, I've really been on this kick in the past week where I'm questioning everything. If there's a problem, I question, well, we're not doing research on that, or is that really solving the problem just because we can show a bunch of numbers that showed we handed something out or did something? How do we show the qualitative piece? How do we show that what we did impacted others? How do we know that we built confidence in others, that we built resiliency with helping them through a process, but not doing the process for them? How do we know that what we did changed something for that person so that they can live a better life with our support? And so when you're thinking out of the box, this is really, I'm going through this in this moment too, just personally. And I'm really trying to put together these questions that I miss being asked. And that is, what do I love? What am I really good at? What things do I want to spend my time on? What things pay? What things don't? And what am I required to do? What do I have to do, regardless of whether I want to? And what things can I change? And I think the sweet spot is what can you change? What can you adapt? What can you make different than it is? And maybe that's something small, like removing a boundary, making sure that a pantry isn't in your office space, it's in the middle of town, but maybe it's in the middle school or in the high school, or maybe it's at a local organization that is already serving veterans or serving another population. It's thinking about things, how to see your box, but color a little outside of your box. So you're still doing the work, but you're thinking about it different. So there's that little one-off kind of thing. And then there's the dreaming, if we had money, if we had resources, if we had partners, if we had people, what could we do? And I think that's where we've all kind of lost our mojo, because you get beat down. When you constantly have to do more with less, which is exactly what they've asked of us since I started, do more with less. Here's less money, but our expectations are not only the same, they're actually higher. And if you don't do what we say, we'll punish you and you won't get the money for your community. So your behavior will let down your whole community, which is depending on you. And so you letting them down is, doing the food pantry in the junior high versus having it in your office space. And so it's about taking these steps so that we are consuming less information, less instruction, less overhead, less mental constraints, and creating more. Being able to be like, what would I do if we had this size donation? What would I do if I had this size donation? What would I do if I had this amount of time to spend? And be able to really dream about the things that you would want if you were in that position, or if you are in that position, being able to speak to that pretty clearly. And then stepping into it, and even finding other people who are like, hey, can we brainstorm at this? If this is how you think and you want to beat ideas off of someone, call someone up who when you're around and you start to talk about ideas, your voice goes faster, you talk higher, you want to interrupt, you're breathless, you're excited, you're like writing notes down, you're thinking, your brain keeps firing. Find those people and start the conversation about thinking outside the box. But the first step is thinking about what you have to do. How do you color outside the lines a little bit? The second step is dreaming. And maybe it is a smaller dream. Maybe it's, what could you do with $500? What could you do with $1,000? What could you do with $20,000? What could you do with $100,000? And not looking at it from a pure perspective of the way we're kind of taught, which is the mechanical, logistical piece of like, we need this percent for salaries and this percent for liability insurance and this percent for rent. All of that's important, and you'll get to that. But the point is thinking outside of the box is this freeing event and activity that you can continuously do, and that you need to start trying to do. Because when you get weighed down by the work, you get weighed down by the responsibility and other people's ideas of how things should work. Especially if you don't think what you're doing is working the way it should, then it's time to say, let's reflect on this. Let's look at this. Let's understand why they want to do it like this. Okay, this is what the federal government says. This is how we're going to get our money. This is what the board says. This is whatever. And then try to work within those parameters, whether that's talking to a program officer, whether that's talking to a donor, whether that's talking to somebody at your state level, that you can say, I understand where you're going with this and what you want as an outcome. You want details. You want to know that you gave out 2,000 canned good items and that therefore you've checked that box off, but you don't feel like you're solving that problem. And so having these conversations, having these ideas, having the ability to start thinking about this, I think it's just a muscle we need to start with. And that's where I'm trying to start this conversation. All of these are just conversation starters. These videos are meant to be conversation starters for people that are new in the field, that have been here a while and are struggling or feel stuck. Those that aren't in leadership positions but have roles in organizations and in helping people, or in businesses and helping people. And I think that when I'm looking at this is my perspective, and I want openness and conversation about not only am I off track, but then add to the cloth. Tell me what you think. Tell me what could be included. And that's why even in my next phases of this process, it's going to be talking to other leaders and getting their ideas about how to get stuck, how to get past being stuck, or how to start this process of thinking outside the box. Those are my thoughts. Those are my ideas, but there's so many other ways. And I think it starts with just using the muscle, starting to think about and question, is what I'm doing working? Is this really going to make a difference? Is this changing the way people live their lives and get to live their lives? And because that's what we're here for. We want to be impactful. We don't want to just show up and do shitty work. No one does. You want to change people's lives. That's why you're in the field. And so I think this is a conversation to start. But I appreciate you staying for it, and I'm excited to further this conversation in the future. So thank you, subscribe, follow, and like, and I appreciate all of you and all the good things that you're doing, and keep thinking outside the box. We do need you.